Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us again for this webinar, How Can Churches Build Back Stronger? I'm Amy Stevens, for those who don't know me, Chief Exec at Gifted, and Andrew's here with me, who's our chairman.
Hi.
And one of our directors. We're recording the webinar as usual, and that'll come on to our website in a couple of days' time. So if anyone misses it, you can direct them to the website to catch up. Question and answer we normally do at the end because it's hard for us to spot questions coming in as we're talking. So we'll do all those at the back end of the presentation. Please do pop them in the Q&A if you can, and not the chat, so we can make sure we don't miss any. So yeah, how can churches build back stronger? And churches, we're taking churches here and cathedrals, obviously. What a tough year it was. And I think churches and cathedrals were some of the organisations that were hit hardest during 2020. And I think that's generally what we found, isn't it, Andrew?
Most definitely. I mean, when you close your doors and basically, try and do things that you can online, it's really tough coming back from what in many places has been complete standstill. A lot didn't end up online. They just closed doors, did a bit of singing in the churchyard, that sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're thinking about how churches and cathedrals can build back stronger and become sustainable again. Well, first of all, it's interesting to reflect on some statistics from last year. So in autumn 2020, I think it was October, we ran a survey across all of our database, but these figures are just those church and cathedral responses. And we saw some really interesting, but worrying to a certain extent, responses from churches and cathedrals. So 2/3 saw a decrease, a significant decrease in income over that period. And the biggest drop was in regular giving. Now, that's not unsurprising given kind of plate giving, etc. So kind of understandable why they would see that. But 83% saw no income streams increase in value. And that was actually quite different to some other sectors, such as the health and welfare sector, for example, which for obvious reasons saw a boom in certain income streams. Again, almost 2/3 thought they would be below budget by up to 50%, which is not good news. Legacy giving. So 60% would be nervous about launching a legacy giving campaign last year, and 50% stopped all legacy marketing. So it's churches and cathedrals only. Again, that was very different to a lot of other sectors who actually thought, do you know what, now this is just as important, more than ever now, and we need to do it sensitively, but we need to press on. 60% cancelled all community fundraising, with only 40% taking it online. Again, that is probably due to skewed slightly to churches, with generally having less capacity for online events, online giving, etc., than perhaps a cathedral or another charity that does a lot of that kind of fundraising, that income stream. So they're already set up for it before the pandemic. 50% stopped all capital campaigns, so fundraising for capital projects, refurbishments, etc. And nobody felt that their fundraising strategy held up well. So really telling that actually I think one of the key things we've learned over the last year, 18 months, is that a robust fundraising strategy with diverse income streams is so incredibly important, regardless of which sector you're working in the third sector. It's incredibly important. And there's lots of reasons why the results from the church and cathedral sector were worse, for want of a better word, or more concerning than other sectors. I think a lot of church leaders were actually out firefighting in the community and supporting community projects and those people in need. We saw a lot of that. And for cathedrals, for example, closed completely for how long? For most of the year almost. And all those events and services that are big income drivers were taken out of the market completely. So there are reasons why this happened, but I think it helps us set the scene from where we're starting from.
Amy, that's so true. If I could just highlight something there that most worries me, and it's the drop in regular giving. Over the years, what I've found is that people develop a philanthropic habit once you start to give and you get the positive reinforcement, hopefully, of that working and seeing something happen with it, then you are inclined to give more. And we all know the truism that givers give again. They're the most likely source of your next gifts are from the people that are already giving to you. So when we see our churches and cathedrals losing that regular giving, that is a real risk when we're coming out of this pandemic, because it is that bread and butter, unrestricted giving that is the lifeblood of the ministry and running of our churches and cathedrals. And the really bizarre thing is that just because the church doors were closed didn't mean the ministry and the work wasn't going on. I mean, we see Father Marcus, who I'm working with down at St. Bart's at the moment. He's on suicide watch on the London bridges every night, going out with other priests and vicars and members of church communities to minister to people with mental health issues and facing some tough challenges. So, just because the church doors have been closed does not mean that church's work stopped during the pandemic. Quite the contrary. But we haven't been telling that story, and we haven't been reminding people how important it is to keep up that regular giving.
Absolutely. So looking ahead, Andrew, to the year in front of us.
Well, what a funny word, hybrid. I mean, I had to double check. I know, hey, but this is where we're going. We're going to a world. I don't know about you at the moment, Amy, but I'm sort of juggling between this world and the world of sort of face-to-face meetings, and it really can make a mess of your diary when you realize something is a face-to-face meeting instead of a hybrid, instead of a virtual meeting. But we are moving into this hybrid world, and that's the same in our worship habits. Some congregations and church cathedral communities have embraced the digital connectivity really well. I mentioned St. Bart's. Then they have grown their congregation in New York, even though they're clearly in Smithfield. So that is something I think we're going to have to come to terms with and understand as we move on in our fundraising as well, not just in the way that the habits of worship. I do think, though, and I had a bit of a giggle about this today, Amy, reading in the news about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could start singing again? After all, and we were joking about the football before, you go into a football stadium, they're absolutely yelling their heads off and singing and chanting, but you can't go into your local church, or not chant, but you take my point. And I mean, for me, you wouldn't believe it, I was a choir boy once, but singing is everything. I love that part of my worship life, and I've really missed that. So in many respects, what's going to come is, I think, a realization or a reaffirmation of the things we really value about our worship, using some of the benefits of our virtual communities to express that virtual worship, so that, as we're doing today, the services are recorded, you can come back to them. You can listen to your vicar's sermon more than once, maybe, who knows? Play it back to them sometimes. So what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of opportunities around it, but we shouldn't forget the power of personal engagement. You and I both know that, so we're told, that the vast majority of our communication, one to another, is actually the non-verbal cues that you get from face-to-face meeting. It's not what comes out the mouth and is said, or even what's written. It's the body language. It's the interconnection, that personal relationship, isn't it, Amy?
Absolutely, yeah.
So now's a great time to re-engage. Now's the time not, if I can be really clear about this, to sit on your hands and just think it's going to go back to the way it was. Because the one thing I think, Amy, you and I both agreed on completely is it is not going to be the same as it was. So get active, get energetic, and re-engage in every form you possibly can, remembering to use those personal moments to remind people about why they're a member of a church community and why it's important, to give and support that community. But most importantly, and that final point listed there, is I really do think as professional fundraisers, we've got to remind ourselves about that regular giving. The gold standard direct debit gift is just the lifeblood of meeting our unrestricted costs. So let's not forget that in our strategies. We sharpen it up post-pandemic.
Absolutely. And I think that point about the virtual worship and engaging people is so important. Do not now, if you've been streaming your services or recording, etc., don't suddenly start doing that once we can go back to capacity, because it has helped people to engage. It has helped build a community of people who aren't necessarily in your parish or your diocese. A slightly different example, but exactly the same concept. I spoke with a lady for another client yesterday, connected to a school. She was alumni from the school, and she said she feels more connected now more than ever, because she no longer lives near the school. She lives 7 hours away, in fact. She can't get to alumni events normally. Even if she's in the area, it's time, isn't it, of traveling to get to an event. And she feels more connected than ever because she's been able to re-engage with people. So, let's not forget that. And let's not forget that some people will still not feel comfortable venturing out for quite some time. Even though, our vaccination program is world leading at the moment, but some people are still very nervous about being in big groups and public spaces. So let's not forget that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thinking about capital projects. So if you were at the stage last year, let's say this time last year, for example, where you were planning a capital project and that halted, where do you go now? I had a number of smaller church clients in this situation who were planning, 2, 3, 400,000 pound reordering and restoration projects. Really important to sit back and look at your case, review that case for support, because it's possible that those plans are not relevant in a changed world, or not necessarily relevant to the funders that you might have thought you were approaching. So particularly trusts and foundations, many of them have changed their criteria slightly. So if they were a church funder, they're still a church funder, but they're looking at actually, let's not just forget everything that's happened, let's learn from it. So in your project now, do you actually need to build in costs for digital technologies that will help you stream services longer? Is it more kind of interactive? Is the facility that you want to create, if you're creating community facilities, are the user groups still going to be the same? All these things need thinking about, because so much has changed over the last 18 months. And with that obviously comes with costs. Costs for building projects are rocketing. Trying to get supplies in with certain materials is incredibly challenging. And what you don't want to do is relaunch your capital campaign for 250,000, for example, if it's a church. And actually, you then find out when you tender in 3 months' time that it's 400,000 because of things you didn't anticipate. So drill down on that and revisit. Also, then go back to the fundraising strategy. Is that up to date? So you may have previously have looked at where is the money. That may have changed. There could be individuals who you were speaking to who may have given elsewhere, whose financial position has changed and now no longer feel able to support. There may be grant funders who have changed criteria. So some of the lottery funders are still looking at kind of that COVID era project. You'll know that a lot of the statutory funders particularly changed their fundraising programs completely for the last year or so and focused on either projects that were already happening or COVID related projects. So, need to look at those timetables, see what funders are doing, see when they're reopening their grant programs again, and really assess your strategy and see if it's up to date. And then finally, your volunteers. Do you have a project that was going to be led by volunteers? Andrew, how many church teams have we worked with where the entire project is delivered on a volunteer basis? Somebody who has past professional experience in the building trade is taking the project lead, and and what have you, that their capacity may have changed as well. So much to consider.
I think that's a very fair point. Normally, when we do a feasibility study for a capital campaign, Amy, we deliberately, set out in black and white that the study is as good for 6 months, probably not much more than that. And we've had a year that's felt like 10. So much has changed. So if you're, assuming that the sources of funding are the same as pre-COVID to now, obviously that's off pace. And I would argue even over the last 6 months, it's dramatically changed. And I suspect over the next 3, it will again. On the cost side, Amy, absolutely agree with that. I'm personally seeing, 15 to 25% cost escalation on build projects right now. It's nearly impossible to get steel if you're after that, by the way. And just simple, I see the picture of scaffolding. That's the other thing that's really tough to get hold of. So most projects have got some of those elements in them. So what I'd encourage you to do is to put, and particularly if you're applying to grant funders, put a COVID contingency in there. So you've got your regular building contingency, but then add at least 10% for what I would describe as materials supply issues. It may not just be COVID, it might be Brexit, it might be a whole range of issues, but we're facing a boom in building activity. And with that, we will get constraints per supply of materials. So, yeah.
And that could be huge. If you're a cathedral planning a £3 million project, then that could have a significant impact on your cost plan, couldn't it? So, and
it's unbelievably embarrassing and difficult, having reached a fundraising target, to then not be able to deliver the project.
Yeah,
there's a whole package. It's another webinar really about how do you go back and ask for more money having reached your target. But the best thing to do is to avoid getting in that place to begin. So do put the contingency in. I'm sure you'll find other ways to spend it if you don't need it.
Then on to revenue, Andrew.
Well, revenue generation, I mean, part of the challenge, particularly for many of our cathedrals, has been the drop in visitor numbers. Now, we're not expecting, for example, overseas visitors to return for another 18 months to anything like the levels they were, and maybe even, take some time before we catch up to previous levels of tourism income. So the key thing now is to take advantage of the switch, and that what's happening, and I'm pleased to see, I think Richard Ginocchio is with us here today from Beds and Hearts Historic Churches Trust. This is an opportunity for our own parish churches to serve our domestic tourists. I, for one, with Julia, we're getting on our bikes. We're doing some cycling this summer, and we'll be visiting the churches along the way. So why not take advantage? Make it easy for domestic tourists to put a fiver, a tenner, whatever, in the pot to help with your maintenance and your regular, costs. So contactless giving. Here's a great example. Amy, is this one you did?
It's not. No, I just thought it was a nice, clear image of what it says on the tin. Yeah.
It's really, they're very easy systems to put in, very effective. There are obviously some management costs involved, but not significant. And when you think about it, this is the way we've learned. Another learning from COVID, contactless payments. There are a lot of organizations saying they actually don't want to go back to cash. And do you know what? Why don't we embrace that? This would make the whole management process so much easier. So one option is to look at contactless giving and using things like the virtual plate. So when people are attending online, they too can share in the giving process as part of your service. Understanding the nuancing of that when you're looking at the order of service and how it's run, sharing best practice is a good thing to do, and is a real carry forward, we think, learning from COVID. But broadly, what this is about is growing your online presence. So whereas once we would have all been interested in getting people to come for various types of services to our churches, whether it's harvest festivals, etc. Now it's about how can you actually promote your services online, getting the normal sorts of web promotional tools going. And frankly, it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult. It's just taking the time to understand it, and getting more people to attend your services virtually. but also those hybrid events. And Amy and I have been doing quite a number of those. And I think you're absolutely right there, Amy. I think even post the 19th of July, hope and pray that is the terminus date, we're still going to find situations where people are not going to be comfortable coming out, attending face-to-face meetings. I'm actually finding it quite odd. Do you shake someone's hand or don't you at the moment? What's the government guidance on that? I'm probably breaking the rules as usual, but it's going to be same after the 19th. It's not going to feel quite right. Should you offer your hand or shouldn't you even up? Because we'll be living with COVID. And I think in that sense, as churches and cathedrals, we need to think very carefully about accessibility, not just, we've got in providing hybrid points of contact, not just through our services.
I think that as well, Andrew, works for people who are really time poor.
Yeah.
So again, I've spoken to a lot of people, and we've found it in our meetings with work. We've been able to have more efficient meetings and more of them because we can get in people's diaries. Because,
True.
If let's say there's an evening event and someone's had a long day at work and thinks, I can't drive for an hour, go there for an hour and a half and drive for an hour home. I just don't have it in me. But do you know what? I can log on for an hour and still be part of that event. So it's not just, as we say, those people who are maybe still concerned about COVID and health reasons, etc., but also time poor people. So it's about engaging as many people as we can going forwards.
Yep. No, I quite agree. And I think the opportunities to entice our visitors and essentially forward book. People's habits have changed. It's not unreasonable now to do that. I mean, it's not just around safe COVID practices. It's about your capacity management, your staffing, and making sure you've got the numbers to make the events viable. I think we can ask a lot more of people we're inviting to events now than we used to do. And using the online technologies to do that. It's worth reflecting on. I think for even to invite people to our own harvest service suppers or services possibly, particularly when we're thinking ahead, and it won't be 3 minutes. I hate to say it, guys, until Christmas and Advent's upon us. How are we going to manage that? Have we thought about that? And how are we going to manage that sense of uncertainty that people will still have? It will be winter. If it's not COVID, maybe it's the flu. There's going to be, again, I think public health considerations for us to really be sensitive to. So now's the moment to think about that, but also how that works with regard to our own fundraising. And likewise with the venue hire elements, Amy, I think that we've got capacity to use online ways of using our venues differently. But maybe too, we're not going to see the same demand for our church halls, our cathedral halls and facilities that we did in the past. Or maybe they'll have a different type of demand. We can't assume anything, really. So it's important to be challenging when you reflect on those plans and your income strategy, when you're thinking about the next financial year.
Absolutely, yeah. A couple of other points for me just to add to that idea of forward bookings. Some of us, I know I am one, are desperate to get back out there and go to events and what have you. And having something to look forward to, quite frankly, is fabulous. So, if you are ahead of the game and have your carol service, Christmas carol concerts planned, I bet you'll sell tickets if you open that booking now and people will be reserving their places.
Especially if I can come and sing.
Exactly. People want to have things in the diary, and they're fully understanding of things getting moved and getting shuffled around, but people are booking and forward booking in the hope that they can be part of things once again. Just on the virtual plate idea, there's kind of two sides to a virtual plate. There's, as Andrew said, the online kind of engagement for people who are joining you for services and events online. But also when you have people back in churches and cathedrals, I mean, before the pandemic, we saw cash decreasing, everything was going on card, wasn't it? And that's even more so over the last year, particularly, a lot of shops aren't wanting you to pay in cash because then it's handling between people, etc. And there's some fabulous contactless giving plates, which are like a virtual plate. So it can be passed around, the plate can be passed around as usual, and people can put cash in there, but there's also a tap to give in the middle. So particularly perhaps as cathedrals, especially as you start to open up and have events, you may have transient visitors coming in for events or services who, aren't cash carriers, but they might tap with £5 or £10 or what have you. So really think about how we can just take the best opportunity for every visitor to give if they choose to. I would say on that.
And also I think Carol Ward's suggesting, Amy, quite rightly, that we've got used to QR codes now, where you go scan with your NHS to go into a venue. Well, the same code you could use for giving. That's a good point. Thank you, Carol.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. Okay. So thinking about how we bring things back together and build again, freedom events, for want of a better phrase. So as Andrew said, after that date, hopefully next month, when we'll be able to get back together, how about holding some kind of freedom service or similar at your venue? Celebrate being back together as a community, whether that is purely the worshipping community or in fact your wider community. Why not, as a parish church or a cathedral, hold an event for the wider community to bring everyone together and celebrate? As we've touched upon, there will be people who do not wish to or can't be part of a mass event. So like we say, don't forget streaming, videoing, etc. Having that online and having that capacity for people to join you remotely, still super important. But it's a nice way to bring people back together, realize what's important to them, and celebrate the fact that we made it through the last 18 months.
It is an opportunity too to recognize people's service over the period. So using your Freedom Sunday service, I assume Sunday the 25th, let's say, of July, is a great opportunity to thank people for their service and their support and so on over the year. But also look ahead. This might be a moment to bring forward new leadership, to talk about new vision, to talk about your church's response to the pandemic. And how you want to be for your community in the year ahead. I think it's going to be a really special day, the 25th. I really do.
And then, of course, we've got the magic of music, Andrew.
Okay. Well, it is. I mean, I have joked that one of the main reasons, or that some people come to particularly cathedrals, is because of the music. I'm not sure they're altogether as Christian as we might like to think they are. But it is nonetheless a core component to our worship. It is going to be something spectacular when some of our organs fire up again, and our choirs, and we are reminded of the majesty of our ecclesiastical church music. And in England, it is an absolute gem. I mean, we are so fortunate as to what we've got, and yet it's been one part of our church life that's really suffered financially. So I think on reflection, this could be a moment to remind people of the importance of supporting our music, and help fund it. Whether you're running a legacy program for endowing a day of music in your church or cathedral, or directly funding it, it's a chance to refresh that case. But it brings our communities back together, a shared experience of singing. We all have our favorite hymns, I know, some not so favorite as well. But let's celebrate that and enjoy it. There will, of course, be concerts, community concerts, and they give us a chance to drive some revenue. And more broadly, I think we need to sort of celebrate some of the acoustic and the sound. Our churches were designed in many places to give us that phenomenal experience of sung worship. And that is something I know many people, including me, have missed over the past year and a bit. So yeah, let's make the most of this. Is a chance to really sharpen up and revisit that case. Ask people to help build it back. Ask them to make a commitment in their will to give money now so that your music can flourish in the year ahead.
Okay, so then on to legacies. Legacy fundraising is always important, always, particularly for churches and cathedrals. And many have shied away from it for the last year. Now, yes, part of that is completely understandable. We're in a very difficult time where people were suffering health issues. We lost an awful lot of people. People lost friends and family. But if it's done in the right way, legacy fundraising should not be offensive to anyone. It's actually now more important than ever that we do this. It really is the key, excuse the pun with the picture on the screen, to future financial sustainability. When you are thinking about your legacy fundraising, and we've got another webinar on our website which talks through legacy programs, and there's chapters in our book as well, make sure that you do that personally. We are all about personal fundraising. It's not about sending a leaflet to every member of congregation or door drop, etc. It's about offering personal discussions. Being able to talk that through with somebody about how their gift might be spent gives people peace of mind. I've had that situation with a cathedral client previously, where a lady who ended up leaving an awful lot of money in a will. They rang me several years later and told them it had arrived. Said, I just want to chat to somebody about gifting my will. Turned out she'd been a chorister. I said, well, you could dedicate your gift to music. She felt, she was delighted with that. We had a lovely discussion. She actually brought me back a bunch of flowers to say, I feel so much better that I've dealt with this. I feel at peace that I've done it. And it's so important, don't we owe that to our donors and our supporters if they're making this incredible gift, to actually have that discussion. The message of immortality can be really important with legacy campaigns. So particularly if, for example, Endow a Day of Music, forevermore I will fund music on that day each year is a really appealing thought to some people. And over the last 18 months, people have really been reminded of what matters to them. We saw giving levels last year. Initially, gosh, Andrew, weren't we worried that, the bottom was going to fall out of the fundraising world? And it didn't. Major givers continued to give money. Giving Tuesday was up 40%, I think it was, on the year prior. Yeah. All the small level gifts, people stepped up and gave to the causes they cared about. And people are still doing that. Yeah. And people will care about your church and your cathedral. And as Andrew said, we need to tell the stories. We need to tell the stories of the good that comes from these institutions, from these buildings, the role they play in community. And it will encourage people to give. And that goes for legacy fundraising as well as every other type. So just to reiterate, legacies are the way to secure your long-term financial sustainability, alongside all those other income streams that fund the day-to-day, like regular, etc.
I think you're right there, Amy. I think what happened really is we took a step back and re-examined what was really important to us as individuals, what really mattered. And so often it was very local. It was our local church, our local shop, our local market, our neighbors, our own health, our family's health, of course, our GP. That is, I think, the most resounding sort of affirmation of the pandemic has been the importance of local. And that's where we and our parish churches in particular really need to remind the community what the church as a community, as a congregation, has been doing during the pandemic. And I think too, it's also about our churches are meeting places, a crossroads, if you like. It's a chance for us to invite back our GPs and local nurses, our civic leaders, people who've given an enormous amount during the pandemic. Invite them to a service and thank them. I was amazed at what happened at Wimbledon yesterday. Those rounds of applause.
Yeah.
Incredibly moving and just so right. That was the nation doing that in its own particular place. But we should be thinking about that, what we're doing in our own communities, to thank our doctors, our nurses, our volunteers, our bin men, people that just kept on going and kept us going,
Yeah. I think, for cathedrals on that, it's about the role that perhaps you play in your city as well, and rebuilding your city. If the cathedral is city centre, you play a role in the economic viability of the city, and working together with councils and civic leaders and how you rebuild again and get people back out and enjoying life and using facilities and galleries and museums and restaurants, etc. There's a role to play there, isn't there? And that's all part of the message as well, as to, you're not just a place of worship as a cathedral, you're also a massive community venue and part of that city and its life.
Yeah. Also probably one of the few very safe places because of the distancing that can be offered in the
yeah, absolutely. So do we have any questions that have come in, Andrew?
Not so far. I don't know whether that's just because everyone's being terribly well behaved.
Any questions from anyone? See if anything.
Chance. No, we're all at the moment. We're all clear, Amy. So there was some conversations around QR codes and things on the chat, but there's no questions today. So not that that either means we've covered off things very well or we've bored everyone to death.
Indeed. I think Richard just raised his hand, but you need to pop a question in the Q&A, Richard, if you need to ask us anything.
So this is Richard Ginocchio from Beds and Hearts Historic Churches Trust.
Yes, I think so.
Who I see are having an auction.
Yeah, some good lots on there.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything coming in, is there?
We'll pick up with Richard separately, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone does think of anything when we log off, pop us an email. So we've got our details here on screen. We'll come back to you. If you want to have a chat, anything we've mentioned today that you'd like a bit of further advice on, get in touch with us. More than happy to help. Our book, Gifted Fundraising, which we offer to everyone in the webinars. If you don't have a copy already, it details our approach to fundraising, has some really practical guidance in there. Email Julie, our colleague, and she'll pop one in the post for you. Now there is a question, Andrew. That's popped up.
So distinction, but Richard Ginocchio asks the distinction between local parishes and county trusts, parochial and broader loyalties. That's a very good point. Clearly, the local parishes, Richard, are very parochial, and the case or the motivations for giving need to address that. But whereas the county trusts, such as yours, it is about addressing a much broader case. It is about the ecclesiastical heritage, if you like, across the whole area of counties in your case. I do think, though, that in that sense, this is where the legacy side is so important, because you are talking about, if you like, our responsibilities in this generation to ensure these churches are supported, so that their fabric, their towers, the very expensive grade 1 listed buildings usually are properly maintained and passed on to the next generation. And these trusts are vital for that, because the grants they can offer to PCCs can often mean the difference between a capital project being sustainable and being delivered and fundraising done, or not at all. So I think you're spot on there. There needs to be a clear distinction between the two fundraising cases. I would say in the trust side, Richard, now is the time, as you are doing, to really be seen and be visible. Doing events such as you are will reignite interest amongst your loyal supporters. And now's not the time for sitting on your hands. So yeah, good question. I hope I've helped you with that, Richard.
Really important point, I think, Andrew, about the responsibility to ensure they're still there. I mean, how many comments have we had about, imagine if our country, the UK or England, was depleted of churches, if they weren't on the landscape anymore?
Yeah.
Could you even imagine, what that would be like?
And well, let's face it. I think the Church of England has over 1,000 grade 1 listed churches. I think it's nearly 1,500 that it maintains with virtually no government grants. And our congregations up and down the country maintain. So, Richard's Trust and others like that are absolutely vital for helping, keep a really important part of our heritage. What would our grandchildren think of us if we let them all fall down? Really, whether they're Christians or not, it'd just be an outrage.
Yeah.
Said the Australian in the room. Remembering we list our buildings in Australia after 50 years. They get on the heritage register. I regularly, my jaw drops in this country at the wonderful heritage we have in England.
You're an honorary Brit now, anyway, Andrew. You've been here.
Yeah, I think this year I've actually done more years living in the UK than I have in Australia. So
Well,
there you
there
are.
you go. There you go.
Is that going to change me for cricket? I don't think so, but you never know.
Brilliant. Right, everyone, we'll call it a day and let you get back to your afternoons.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us once again. Like I say, drop us an email if you need anything at all. And we'll put the recording online. But everyone, stay safe, stay well, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.